One of the glittering hopes of the future can be summed up in two words: geothermal everywhere.
If the world's going to decarbonize in a reasonable time frame and at a reasonable cost, we're going to need a low carbon heat source and power source that's 24/7, non-weather dependent, can be implemented almost anywhere in the world.
It is a constant and very efficient source of renewable energy.
There are only a few candidates for that role: nuclear fission and fusion, perhaps carbon capture and storage on natural gas, and super hot rock geothermal.
To get the whole country behind climate action, the solutions can't all be branded as green and left. And that's what's exciting about geothermal. On top of its promise of abundant, reliable, clean energy, it's congenial to fossil fuel states and their vast infrastructure.
Today, heroic individuals who've spent their entire careers working for the very industry that is blamed for the climate crisis are developing the technologies capable of delivering geothermal everywhere.
The ground is shifting under every single one of those hurdles, pardon the pun. It seems like every single one of those hurdles is really loosening, and that is the thing that gives me hope.
We all know that there's unlimited energy right under our feet, but it's been tantalizingly hard to access cost effectively.
I am very excited about the possibility that we will continue to develop our geothermal potential.
Drill, baby, drill. For heat, not oil. It's an idea whose time has come.
It's happening. Buckle up. This is going to be amazing.
So hello and welcome to this afternoon's panel session, Geothermal, What's Oil and Gas Got to Do with It? I'm Kirsten Pasturel, CEO of ZeGen Energy, a geothermal company based here in Aberdeen, and it's an absolute pleasure to be chairing this afternoon's event. And I'd like to take a moment to highlight a couple of firsts that you might not be aware of. This is the first time ever that geothermal has had its own panel session at Offshore Europe. It's also the first time that such a panel session has been broadcast live to a global audience, because today we are streaming live across the globe to the Pivot 2023 audience, so no pressure. Now, a theme we're hearing a lot in the conference so far is the relevance of the oil and gas skill sets in the transition. And although this is an SP conference, the reality is that we're joined today by energy enthusiasts across multiple energy industries, not just oil and gas, but colleagues from other renewables. I mean, here we are streaming live to the Pivot audience. And the reason for that is that we are all energy professionals. And the reality is that our skill sets are massively transferable, and they don't sit with any one energy vector, and they are absolutely critical to the energy transition. I would go as far to say that the oil and gas supply chain has more relevance to geothermal than any other renewable sector. Just think about it. Exploration, geoscience, wells production, flow assurance, it's all there. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce the rest of the panel, who collectively provide an international powerhouse of knowledge, experience, and insight into the geothermal sector. I'm joined today by Henning Bjørvik, who is head of low carbon supply chain research at Rystad Energy, and Robertson-Tait, who's the president of SLB's GeothermEx, and David Reid, who is technology officer and chief marketing officer at NOV. So The idea is this will be quite an interactive session. I have some starter questions, but please use the Slido app and the conference app. If you don't have that, we have some mics at the side of the room that you're welcome to use to ask a question. So Henning, can you help us set the scene on the geothermal market size, demographics, development and forecasted growth areas and markets?
Sure. First of all, I just have to say that, you know, it's fantastic that we are here at Offshore Europe speaking about geothermal. I think, you know, if someone asked me, let's say a couple of years ago, if I thought I would be sitting here talking about geothermal, I probably would have laughed. But that's, you know, a huge testimony to the geothermal community that we are here. I think it's been done, you know, fantastic work over the last couple of years in, you know, making this energy source actually visible in the talks about the energy mix as well, right? And of course, it's a huge testimony to what has been done on the ground and the fantastic research that we have seen over the last and developments over the last couple of years as well. So I just wanted to actually, before I kind of set the scene on the market, I just wanted to kind of tell you about my story into geothermal as well, because I think it's quite explaining to you know, why we're here. And you know, I used to lead actually the well service group at Rystad Energy. And around 4 years ago, we saw this kind of wave of questions from the well service community and land drillers into, you know, what's the potential for geothermal? You know, what's the market? You know, how many wells will be drilled, etc. And we kind of encountered this like a little bit of a vacuum in the industry for market data. So we took this, you know, as a mission of building out basically, you know, the kind of a digital twin of the market and mapping out all the 20,000 geothermal wells that are out there and what, you know, the developers are doing. And then basically, you know, I continued down this geothermal route. And I would say that, you know, after this kind of wave of well service companies and land drillers moving in or making kind of cautious business decisions in geothermal, we also saw the likes of, you know, metals companies, OCTG, other OFS companies coming in. And over the last couple of years, it's been a huge push from, you know, traditional E&Ps into the market as well. So I think that's quite explaining to you know, why we are here, and just to kind of set the scene, you know, on the market itself, because I'm guess that, you know, a lot of you maybe are completely new to the market or somewhat new to the market. Geothermal is quite a small market if you look at the grand scheme of things. It's if you look at the total power generating capacity in the world, it's around 8,860 gigawatts. Geothermal is anyone wants to take a guess how much geothermal is installed in the world today?
Oh, I won't raise my hand.
And you probably know it. It's close to 17 gigawatts of electricity generation capacity installed, meaning that geothermal is today 0.2% of the power mix. So if you were putting that up on a chart on the screen, for example, you would have to zoom in pretty far to actually see geothermal. And it's actually drilled around, actually last year it was drilled close to 800 deep geothermal wells, but a large portion of that was in China for heating. In the power sector, it was drilled around 200 or slightly above 200 wells. And that's where oil and gas comes in, right? Because in oil and gas, we drill 60,000-70,000 wells per year. So if you take, you know, a fraction of that learning into geothermal, it's a potentially a huge market growth in the years to come. But out of those 17 gigawatts that are installed today, you know, half of that is installed in the US, Philippines, and Indonesia. And that's quite describing, you know, actually, if you look at the projects that are out in the market today, almost or a large portion is around what you call like the Ring of Fire, basically going up New Zealand, up Indonesia, you know, up to Japan and down the west coast of Americas. I think, Anne, you're probably going to cover this a little bit more on the US side, but I mean, even in the US, right, 95% of the power generation capacity is in Nevada and California. So, but then of course, you know, it's a big heating market as well, which is maybe closer to us sitting here in Aberdeen at the moment. And there is installed around 16 gigawatt thermal in the world, and 60% of that is in China. But Europe is a massively potential growing market in the years to come, which will bring a lot of opportunities for you guys, you know, for potentially working in the well service side of things. But I think this is also a little bit of the beauty of geothermal as well. It's such a diverse energy source. You know, you can use it for power generation, you can use it for heating. I mean, we've seen ADNOC, for example, now using it for district cooling in Masdar City in UAE. Potentially, you can use it for lithium extraction, combine it with hydrogen, you can repurpose oil and gas wells. And I think that's what's very exciting with geothermal as well, that you have such diverse use cases. And you can actually, I mean, my favorite thing is actually to say that, you know, if you look at the two markets that are hottest markets today, if you were to ask me, I would say Germany and I would say Indonesia. And these markets are very much completely different. Because if you drill, for example, a 2-3 kilometer well in Indonesia, you're likely hitting 250, 300 degrees Celsius. Well, if you drill a 5-6 kilometer well in Germany, you're probably still at a below 150 degrees Celsius, right? But still, these are the two hottest markets, which I think is quite exciting to see. And I think just to kind of round off this little bit of this introduction here to why we need geothermal as well, because I think we need to talk about that also. It's, of course, you know, it's a baseload energy source. Doesn't have the intermittency as you have for solar and wind. So you don't need to, you know, couple it up with a battery, for example. You don't need dispatchable energy sources to fill in these intermittent periods, for example. And it is and something I think is quite under communicated as well that we need to talk about is that it has a small land footprint, right? And I'm just going to take an example here. I live in Norway, and we have a lot of issues with onshore wind, for example. So we have a newly commissioned wind farm in the middle of the country that is now ruled by the High Court to be decommissioned because it's violating the human rights of the native people there, basically, because it's in the reindeer tracks. So it's a cultural issue when it comes to land footprint, but it's also in terms of biodiversity, right? And then you can use it for power heating, and then of course it's, you know, what you guys in the hall there today will solve, you know, this synergies with the oil and gas industry, right?
If I can sort of contribute to that, I'll just say that, you know, first of all, Rystad was the first to really get into geothermal in the analyst space, and so thanks for that. Well done.
Thank you.
It was good to see it. It had been abandoned by Bloomberg long ago. And so anyway, thanks for that. A few other synergies about geothermal. I'll just say there's a trend in the United States to have solar and geothermal together. And there's a good reason for that. There's in the desert of Nevada, where you mentioned a lot of the geothermal development is, there's no water for power plant cooling. And so what happens in the hot summer months is that the geothermal plants become less efficient. And so they put often solar PV next to a geothermal plant. And this is happening more and more. Ormat is developing at least 5 new solar additions to their geothermal projects. And there's one by Enel, which is very creative, which has both solar PV and solar thermal. And what they're doing is making up the difference in the day, meaning the revenue meter can still run as well as the kilowatt or megawatt meter and keep the output steady during those hot days. Also, in the US, you know, there's a lot of current tax incentives and other things for geothermal, but there's also a lot of interest in direct air capture. And the hubs are just starting to form in the United States. We've been fortunate enough to be involved in the California hub, which is where GeothermEx is located, and direct air capture units actually need heat and low-grade steam, at least some of them. And so we're doing that. So another synergy that comes across. So far, no wind and geothermal, but I'm betting on West Texas for that. And I hope Jamie will push that along so that we see more synergies with geothermal. So yes, it is probably the only major remaining source of baseload power that is renewable in the world. So, you know, we need more of it. And I'll just say that my history is a long one. You can probably tell that I've been at this for a while, and just decided that oil and gas wasn't for me when I graduated with my geology degree. And I went to study geothermal in New Zealand and never looked back. So it's been a great career. It's very interesting, and we're seeing a lot of interest from our oil and gas partners in SLB who acquired us in 2010. And why did they do that? Because of the adjacency, as you mentioned. And not only that, but as climate change has gone on, and so that was in 2010, but by 2020, our message is a balanced planet, and they see geothermal as being one of the important elements of it. And so in the new energy division, geothermal is one of the 5 startup companies. Well, we're the old the old renewable energy, as I call it, or the old new energy. But it's nice to be part of a company that can scale, a company that is interested in geothermal growth, a company that recognizes the value of addressing climate change. And maybe I'll leave it over to David to follow up with something really cool.
Something really cool. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting area because we've been around geothermal for a long time because it's drilling and we have equipment in there, but always had that view of it's a small market. You know, always thinking it's a low cost environment, and I think probably, gosh, maybe 10 years ago we really started having conversations about trying to get into that. How can we do more? And it wasn't until we start looking at, you know, the enhanced applications that it really starts to get interesting, because you're applying something that we've already done in drilling. You're starting to say, okay, have we the ability here to do what we did with shale? You know, is there a way to multiply and get to hot rock and convert it? And that really opened up that conversation and that thinking, which really is where the opportunity lies, is what have we done in shale that we could then apply, and that ability for an industry to go in and take something that was, you know, everyone was blowing off, similar to shale. You're like, you know, this is just an annoyance in our world, into actually creating a business out of it. That's really opened up the world for us, is saying I know we were going into a downturn, and everyone in the geothermal world was like, it's you again. Is the oil price low? Is the oil price low? You know, we've done all this before. That was generally the tone of, please, could you just get the oil price back and go away? Which is what they've experienced in the past, as interest comes and then it goes. But really what's happened is it's grown this new openness to technology and ideas. And I think we've certainly done some R&D in the more out there stuff, but specifically just taking existing applications and saying, you know, what could we do that's different, particularly because of the way we're wired. That craziness that we applied of, you know, this is a low cost environment, which shale was as well. But that idea that you will invest in and open up new opportunity, that's what's been really exciting market wise, and kind of opens up the space, you know, to saying there's a whole lot more that we can be doing all over the world. So I think from a market standpoint, we're still discovering places and things that we can do. But it's been an exciting journey. I think there's been a lot of technologies that as we've poured into and focused on, we've seen it really open up as we start to break the barriers, just like we did with shale. You're starting to look at, you know, what we did with horizontal and how we managed to learn to get more out of something we hadn't even thought of before. We're seeing that in a lot of fronts across our technologies.
Just a small note there. I think it's also quite interesting, right? I mean, because in geothermal, you have this kind of opportunity, sort of, that solar and wind didn't have, sort of, right? I mean, now you have a starting point that is up here compared to where solar and wind, for example, where by just taking that learning from the shale industry, for example, or from the oil and gas drilling side, right?
Well, and opposite, we've seen it in wind and solar too in our investments, that there's, when you start thinking that this is low cost, we got to get cost out of it, you start making cost decisions, and no one's thinking, what if we put some money into this? And could that, oh, no, you don't understand. You know, we just saw a top drive for the first time. You know, the geothermal was, you do the kind of money you have, your rich cousins, please don't come near our environment, because you'll just bring in lots of costs that we can't do. And of course, as we've been doing it, we've been uncovering all sorts of investments you can make to deliver more value.
Okay, thanks for that. And I mean, it's quite evident that there's a whole piece here about the bigger innovation landscape. and the influence and transition of these oil and gas skills into geothermal, and also oil and gas's approach to complex high intensity capex projects that geothermal tends to be. And that leads me quite well into first question here. So do we need better or new drilling technologies in order to make deeper geothermal energy more cost effective? Now, Dave, I know that your company is already innovating in this space. I'll let you kick off with that one.
Yes.
The answer is yes.
No, and we've had great success in a short period, which has been nice. That's not a normal story. A lot of the technologies you're looking at, 5-10 years of work yet ahead. But just in the simple mechanics of things we can do, bit design, we've been running with particle drilling, which just in that alone, just designing bits properly for the application, because people weren't paying that much attention to it.
Nope.
It wasn't hard. So, I mean, the work with Forge has been really interesting just because we've never been so loved by a customer. It was really, everyone's like, you got to experience talking to this customer because they're like, we think you're amazing. But it was really just bringing in really technology we were applying to other places and say, okay, here's hot rock application. Certainly the bits immediately, much, 60% life improvement. But then bringing in particle drilling and some of the work we've done there to actually take, 2 millimeter shot and fire it into the rock. Really big breakthrough for just performance because it's all cost.
Yeah.
You start to look at, rates of penetration from, 15 feet an hour to, I think we're 109 at the last. So you're really starting to push up into real breakthrough in hard rock applications. So that's been great. And then the temperature, we were off down the road really early. We got into a grant world of how do we get high temperature electronics, and that's what we thought had to be the answer. And it's not that people didn't already look at that and weren't already trying those things. But then we just really got into what if we could cool things down. And that's been a great journey of just simple archiboscope coatings, and looking at their thermal properties and saying, well, what if we designed it to actually get more and more cold fluid down in the hot zone, and that's really been a great journey. We're really starting to get into new coatings as well as new systems for actually driving very, very cold fluids into the well. And I think that's going to be a huge breakthrough in rate of penetration as well as using high-end electronics that previously weren't even would have a chance in that environment. So a lot of good work going on there, and that's really rapid things that we can do to make a difference in performance. So yeah, that use of fiberglass liners, which has just been fantastic as well across all applications. So there's some really simple things, just targeting at things we know and saying, all right, how much can we do very quickly to actually change the performance and then the economics of a well.
Super. Have you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the adjacency of the two businesses is just phenomenal. And, but we've been the poor cousin for a long time, let's just say. The value of the energy content of the product we both produce varies extremely widely. And so, and therefore, the value of geothermal energy has been low traditionally. But that doesn't mean there hasn't been innovation. And I'll just tell you that when we were first acquired in 2010, GeothermEx asked for a pump that would operate at above 180 degrees Celsius, which was the typical minimum or maximum temperature at which high flow rate pumps could operate. SAGD pumps can do a little bit, but we need, we're looking for 50,000 barrels a day of hot water. That's the kind of flow rates we want. And so there's this funny zone between 180 degrees where you sort of run out of pumping headroom from the temperature perspective, and self-flowing wells, which kick up and are really quite productive at about 225 degrees C. So what can you do? Well, actually a pumped well at 180 degrees C can actually make more power than a self-flowing well at in that weird in between range, given the same productivity index, let's say. So we said we need this, there's a gap. And eventually, and I'm proud to say it was this year, so almost 10 years or a little bit more than 10 years later, We have a very high flow rate pump that is being adopted very quickly by operators who were once in that sort of, too hot to pump, too cool to self-flow range. And so things like that make a huge difference to geothermal operators. If they can get another megawatt of flow out of a well, it makes a heck of a difference in the economics of production. So there's other things like that that's happening. And David, obviously you're in the thick of it. But within SLB, there's new initiatives and new ideas coming across every day that we think about and figure out how we can do, and look for help from partners and all of that. So I don't know how you feel about the technology side.
Yeah, I think it's it's super exciting to hear about what you're saying, Anne and David, and I think this is exactly what we need, right? Because if you look at it kind of on the market side, a little bit high level here, some of the things that has been holding back geothermal in the history is kind of like that. First of all, it's a little bit of location restricted. I know that there's some people in the geothermal community that will shoot me down for saying this, but if you look at the map, right, I mean, everything is kind of around the ring of fire at the moment. But that's what we are going to solve, right? And then it is, as you say, a high capex market, coupled with a risk that you don't have in other renewable markets, right? So the subsurface risk, and it's super exciting. I mean, these are the three kind of main components that you need to solve for this market to take off, right? And that's exactly what you guys are working on, right? So I think that's very exciting to see. And then there's a few other things that probably needs to come in place as well, and that is also in terms of public perception as well, right? It's probably something that's not talked too much about, but we talk about social license to operate in oil and gas, but it's also the same for geothermal, right? And of course, getting that visibility out there in the market as well. Geothermal is not that visible, which is a pro, but it can also be a con.
Yes.
So I think it's quite exciting to see that. I think those three main boxes hopefully are about to be solved, and then there is a potential steep curve here when it comes to the market going forward as well. And it's also a little bit of chicken and egg, right? So I think sometimes it can be hard to invest in geothermal just based on the fact that the market is quite small. Because I mean, if you look at the market itself, it's if you stack up what the operators or developers are using in terms of how much they're spending on cooling tower, how much they're spending on drilling fluids, how much they're spending on rigs, the power market last year was worth $6 billion. If you add the heating side, it's another $1 billion if you look away from the district heating facility. So it's a $7 billion market. Many of you in the audience, we are in Aberdeen. You're probably familiar with the subsea market, for example, in oil and gas, a small part of the oil and gas market. But that is a $27 billion market. It's 4 times larger than the global geothermal market. If you look at the well service market, it's $131 billion. So some of the question is like, how do you invest in geothermal, right? When it's that small? And I think that's the luxury geothermal have as well at the moment, because you can co-invest with oil and gas, right? I mean, you can do what's being done now on Utah Forge. You can invest in, technology also that can be used in both geothermal, and you can justify it, that the fact you can actually enhance production, for example, in oil and gas as well.
And we shouldn't forget deep basin geothermal. I mean, that's your domain, and plenty of potential there that is going untapped. I'll just, tell you, we're doing a study right now for the Sultanate of Oman, looking at the geothermal potential in the deep basins there. And this is not, it's our first Middle Eastern customer, I will say, but it's not the last.
No, that's right.
And the one that I probably shouldn't talk about is one you all will know well. But anyway, as we go forward in this deep basin play, we're applying decades of very, tight scrutiny on the data and, what will work and what will be commercially successful to the deep basin domain. And so, your hot water cut, often a problem, but let's figure out where and when we can use it. It's not going to work in every basin, but it certainly will work in many. So I feel sort of bullish about the whole re-entry, I'll say, of oil and gas majors. When Chevron sold their assets in 2016, that was a very sad day for us, but eventually, they had all exited. Of course, Chevron is back in now, but as things go. But it will be, I think, really important for a strong partnership in technology, in the ability to scale, in the ability to deliver wells faster. And I'll just go back to the shale technology, even though it's not maybe an innovation anymore, but it sounds great to us when we hear that shale operators reduce their drilling times by 2/3, something like that, to get through. You lucky guys with softer rock, easier to drill, but you also applied a lot of technology to it. And the adjacency to EGS there is definitely being exploited, as some of you may have seen by Fervo Energy's recent announcement last month about their success with their first EGS doublet in a hard rock domain, but using fracturing techniques that are right out of your playbook.
Yeah, I think it's worth kind of there, because we're talking the big markets in geothermal, which is a relative term. But you know, Middle East, I mean, we're the same. UAE, Aramco's starting to push. I mean, it's all going, because any hot rock application is another benefit we're not really saying, but we have other hot rock drilling applications that actually get this technology and are applying it, which gives volume as well. So now we're actually running together with the same technology, because for us, we're seeing, as we learn it over here in geothermal, we're seeing it expand into other markets.
That cross fertilization, the whole HPHT space, you know, it's happening, and it's really exciting.
We didn't even talk before, and here it is actually meaning something. I mean, we're working in Cornwall as well at geothermal with lithium production. So I mean, there's just all these little pieces that potentially can grow out. So it is or Canada. We've had some wells up in Canada, and I just think it's expanding away from the ring of fire as we look at other applications, and that really helps with potential volume and growth.
But I think we shouldn't lose sight of the conventional domain, and particularly in South America. There is so much untapped potential there, and the key is to make the right mix of technologies. Like, can we make green hydrogen from Andean resources that are stranded up there, or can we collaborate with mining entities in the high Andes? When will Colombia really take off? You know, we're pushing all these boundaries as we speak, and looking for that great traditional domain. But you know, EGS and of course closed loop technology is advancing now. And I'll just say that, you know, ground source or geothermal heat pumps are a very old closed loop technology, which is blowing up and expanding every day, almost everywhere. And so this, you know, the closed loop technology for power production is quite different and much more complex. But nevertheless, we see these, what we call the unconventionals, which for us are closed loop and EGS, really sort of starting to take off now. And it is with the help from all of the oil and gas industry and all the years of experience. By the way, GeothermEx is celebrating its 50th year, just like SPE right now. So we've been at it for a while, and this is bringing us into, I think, a new era of clean energy. And geothermal has a lot to offer in many ways. And you mentioned lithium. We're very busy in the Salton Sea on the lithium stuff. We're also working in Cornwall with a company and making sure that we can use the geothermal heat as a community energy strategy. We're seeing citywide district heating using ground source heat pumps in Boston, you know, Massachusetts. So there's a lot happening that should give us hope and motivate us to recognize that geothermal has an important place, even though it's a small player today.
I think it's spot on, and what you're saying is there's room for everything, right? I mean, and conventional, definitely. You know, if you look at the areas like the Munich area, for example, where we have an aquifer, like you don't need the EGS or AGS there, right? So, and I think that's what we should try to, you know, kind of, more or less celebrate us and push forward as well, this diversity in geothermal, right? I mean, fracking, for example, might in some areas, for example, in Europe, be more challenging. So, you know, I also root for, you know, the closed loop side of things. I think we need whatever we can have here.
It's
also,
always an and.
yeah, always an and, yeah. And also, you know, to your point, David, as well, you know, things at some point, you know, start to kind of go together as well, right? And that's that I think is what we are starting to see in geothermal at some point also.
About a year ago, I was in talking to Congress people and senators about energy and geothermal came on. They had very little that they knew about it.
Yeah.
And we just sat there and listed. They didn't even know what was going on with the startup community in the US.
Yeah.
And you know, suddenly we get cash releasing, you know, because they understand, oh, this is a thing, you know, very underfunded over years compared to other sources. So it's really nice as it awakens. And gets the support that it needs, you know.
It's almost a little bit bad to say, but like sometimes it's like also coincidences that push things forward, right? I mean, look at for example the winter storm in Texas as well, right? You basically need something like that to push geothermal forward. But I think now it's like we get to this momentum where things hopefully start to roll by itself. But I think also in terms of like the energy mix in general, right? That you sort of you add so much wind, you add so much solar. I think the more you actually add of these energy sources, it's not a competition, because I think this will actually also push the discussion about geothermal forward and you know, stability of the grid, for example, right?
Well, that's a really big thing in California, I can tell you. The solar penetration is massive, and the grid has become quite unstable. And so, well, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we were being told by the system operator that we should do variable geothermal, you know, have it you know, load follow, which by the way, we have done to a degree, but you know, obviously cycling geothermal wells on and off is not really a practical solution. But the penetration of solar and the grid needs have driven the California Public Utilities Commission to mandate 2 gigawatts of geothermal. And they don't say geothermal, but it has to be clean, firm, you know, not dependent on weather. So it's kind of a secret code, I guess. But you know, this is really driving things in California now, and all of the undeveloped fields in California. There's probably at least 3 or 4 gigawatts more in California alone, if not more than that. I think USGS calculates about 5 gigawatts more. Other people have more positive numbers, but all of that is starting to be looked at again, you know, resources that were passed over because they weren't as good as another. So it's growing, and it's good to see policy coming like that. And Secretary Granholm, you know, is a big fan of geothermal, which is marvelous, and really trying to promote it and pushing forward with President Biden in the Inflation Reduction Act. A lot of important tax credits that can be helpful to operators big and small, even those who don't have a big tax, you know, burden. People can actually trade the credits or even get an outright payment from the government. And it's an investment in all our future. And, you know, we're really pleased to see it. And, you know, it's pushing people, new entrants into the US market too, which is really exciting to see. Not just the usual suspects. So more policy, I think, in that direction. And Germany, of course, has been a real leader there, will be, I think, driving more. But, you know, the technology and the scale is going to come from you. It's going to come from oil and gas. And this is what Jamie meant by pivot. Pivot is the pivot of oil and gas to geothermal because it's so adjacent. And it's just all come together in this decade. So I'll just say welcome and join us and be us. You know, we are all together in this.
That leads me to an interesting question which has come through in Slido. And we've seen this in the geothermal market before, where we've seen, you know, we've seen booms perhaps which have been offset by declines or, you know, bad times in the oil and gas industry. So when we have this influx of skills in the transition into geothermal, how do we keep them there?
Well, I'll just say, for me, having been through a few, you know, boom and bust cycles, both in geothermal and oil and gas, it seemed kind of a fanciful thing the last few times. It doesn't seem that way to me now. So I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel like oil and gas is here to stay. Yes, you're making lots of money in oil and gas, and good on you. We need it. But the more we do CCS and clean up our act, the better. And, you know, when you start to think about the actual costs of carbon emissions, which, you know, I can't even say the evil carbon tax words hardly because it's such anathema in the United States. But, you know, we need to recognize where we are, and we need to recognize what we need to do. So, but I think, you know, I'll leave it to David maybe to come to something more less hopeful and more real. Go ahead.
I don't know. I think attracting people is often, I mean, when I came into the industry, I wasn't trained to be in oil and gas, and I wasn't planning on it. And when I came in, what surprised me was the people and the technology and the things that they do, and the culture. And I think that's always our challenge, is communicating who we are, and that's what draws people in. But I think when you have good culture and you're doing good things, and I think we are, then that will draw people. Then we always have a communication challenge of how do you let people know what you're doing. But what's fun with geothermal is you're right in the space of interesting, you know, you're like, okay, this is a better answer.
Yeah.
And the idea of scaling a better answer gets really exciting. That will draw people in. Because I mean, you were talking about California, you know, even everyone understands this is a base load. This works like a nuclear power plant, that you're constantly delivering energy at a certain rate. And California with solar and wind, you're seeing lots of undulation based on sun, based on wind. And then the new dynamic of a lot of electric cars turning on at 6 o'clock charging. Yep. And so they're seeing this new spike. So these spikes are very problematic. And so it means that we actually have a great answer that fits in with the oil and gas skill set. So I think it's always learning how to talk about this stuff better. And I will say Jamie does a great job of getting that out there, but we need to keep doing that because it's exciting and good people and we're solving world problems, which I love.
I think also what is maybe a little bit different from before, or maybe a lot of different, is that, you know, I think we are really at this time where we are, you know, redesigning our energy systems. You know, it's, you know, EVs is a great example. I mean, I come from Norway, and there is 90% of the cars that we sell now is EVs. Everyone says that, you know, Norway is just a laboratory. Can't really rely on that, you know, it's a special place. But I mean, even if you look at China now, it's like 32% of the cars that were sold last year were EVs. So things are changing, and this is going to drive, you know, the demand for oil and gas down. And if you look at, for example, you know, our CEO Rystad, he always likes to take this example of the Al Dhafra solar plant in UAE. It's a massive plant, but it has a levelized cost of $13 per megawatt hour. So it means that, you know, if you charge your car for $1.3, you can drive 500 kilometers. So, but of course, that is an extreme example, right? But I think, you know, we are in this system now where you will see a lot of solar and wind being poured into the market. Last year, it was installed over well over 200 gigawatts of solar. There is capacity actually at the end of this year to install, if you wanted, to install 800 gigawatts of solar in a year. And that itself will actually drive this discussion, I think, about, you know, other energy systems to kind of balance the future energy system in many ways. So I think that's what has changed. I think we basically need geothermal in there as well to balance things out.
And it has another feature, which is resilience. I mean, if you looked at after Hurricane Maria at the solar farms in Puerto Rico, you know, you'd be crying. It was devastation. I'm not saying that every area, you know, has such extreme weather events. They don't. But, you know, we have blackouts in the grid, and the geothermal plants have black start capabilities. So, and, you know, this kind of resilience, I think, is something we have to plan for as the climate continues to evolve.
Yeah.
So I have another very relevant question here about the key hindrances in terms of progressing and growing geothermal. We've touched a little bit on the innovation. We've spoken about the importance of bringing oil and gas skill sets into the industry. And there's also a piece there about, you know, what's happening in the bigger landscape in terms of legislative challenges facing geothermal projects. And Henning, maybe you're a good one to speak about, you know, what can we learn? And I actually speak quite specifically here about the UK because, you know, we're not very on that ball. But what has been done elsewhere that other countries could learn from?
Yeah, so I think I mean there are certainly, you know, some challenges that needs to be overcome, right? I mean, we talked about dislocation restriction, the risk in the market, the cost, etc., right? And I think, you know, we talk a lot about what oil and gas can do for geothermal. And I think is you know, it's very obvious. It's a huge opportunity, right? But what we will also probably, you know, meet in geothermal is that you know, sometimes you have to choose as well, right? I mean, for example, here in Europe, if you're going to drill, you know, complex systems, you might rely on, you know, rig and potentially crew from the US to actually be able to do that, right? And, you know, in the boom and bust or boom times of oil and gas, you're sort of competing actually with oil and gas as well. So that is just to kind of bring that up as well as a kind of the other side of the discussion, which needs to be brought up. But yeah, in the world right now there are 8,000 drilling rigs. Most of them do oil and gas, right? But when it comes to the permitting side, and I mean, there, I think, you know, there's still a lot of things that needs to be done. You know, in the US, for example, so Anne, you can probably elaborate on this, but I guess it's much harder to get permitting for a geothermal power plant, for example, than it is to drill an oil and gas well, right? Although a lot of what you do is more or less the same, and that makes it quite vulnerable to lawsuits, etc., right? I think it's actually even the same for grids. It's like much harder to actually get permitting for a grid than it is for a pipeline, for example, right? So I mean, the legislative side, the policy side is of course, you know, extremely important. But I think you know, personally, I really like the US approach that, you know, you have kind of an OPEX incentive for, you know, manufacturing, for example, clean manufacturing equipment. You have you know, an incentive for developing the actual project itself. And then you actually have the R&D funding as well, right? Whereas in Europe, for example, it is much more like, okay, you're building a solar plant, we will look into the case and, you know, give you the funds to basically do that, right? So it's a more like holistic approach, I think, in the US, which I think benefits geothermal very well. And I think, you know, that's Utah Forge right there, right? I think it's exactly what we need, this kind of holistic approach of lifting things forward.
So can I just add, I have another question which feeds into the same space here from Simon Hayton. Do you think the UK needs a clearer policy and regulatory framework for geothermal development? Yes, it does.
Yes.
And I think, you know, this conversation shows that.
Yeah,
what's been done else.
I think it does. And there's an MP from Crewe and Nantwich, Kieran Mullen, who's a big promoter of geothermal, mostly for heating in the UK. I mean, I think that's the likely solution, but thinking about the geopolitics of the time, the cost of natural gas, there's a lot of work that is being done and is starting to grow in terms of geothermal for heating. And when we think about, you know, burning fossil fuels at thousands of degrees to heat our homes to 22 degrees, you know, the heating market is a huge decarbonization opportunity that I think the UK could really take advantage of.
And they do seem to be moving. I mean, just in the last few months, we're hearing, you know, enough noise to say they're trying to pursue this. They understand that they're in trouble. So that's good news, is that they are trying to push into it. Whether they do or not, we'll see.
Yeah, and I mean, it's going into hospitals. This is, I think, a great showcase for geothermal energy. The operating costs of hospitals are, you know, extraordinarily high altogether, but you know, if we can decarbonize the heat and get a cheaper heating product, why not? And I just wanted to say something about infrastructure as well, because that's a hindrance. Grids are old in most places, and I maybe I'm generalizing a bit too much, but speaking about the United States, you know, everybody wants to electrify their vehicles. Everybody wants clean energy, or at least in California, and you know what? How are we going to get that without major upgrades to the grid? And this is a major investment that you know, is still sort of looming over us, I would say. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, 100%. And
Yeah.
actually, I just wanted to hang on to the heating side of things. You know, I've seen a lot of posts, for example, saying that it's the elephant in the room. I think maybe I saw it from your LinkedIn, Jamie, but it really is, right? I mean, heating in Europe, it's 10,000 district heating facilities in Europe. Most of them run on natural gas, right?
Yeah.
So we need to talk about, you know, how do we decarbonize the heating sector as well? One option is, of course, you know, to go electric, but here we have geothermal, right? We can connect to these 10,000 district heating facilities. And it's not that hard to map out either. When you have this, you know, you look at, you know, what are the feedstock into these facilities? You look at, you know, is there, for example, drilling experience there from before? What's the policy sentiment? And, you know, in our view, for example, we have mapped out like 1,000 towns that is, you know, a golden opportunity to just go and knock on the door, bring geothermal in there, and you can decarbonize your heating in that town.
And having geothermal heating is very much more real to ordinary people than power to the grid. And, you know, to me, this is a great entree for geothermal.
Okay. I have another question here. Again, it's along the technology line. Is geothermal prepared to invest in the technology and share the drive and cost for innovation, similar to what we've seen in oil and gas, David?
Trying to understand that question.
So do you think there is, do you think that the geothermal industry is prepared to invest in technology and share the drive?
No, well, I mean, Utah Forge has been great for us because we have a place to actually test, which is a large, you know, a large part of taking things to market. But I will say something, it's a company's drive to go in and do that. Nobody asked us or offered us money to do that. So no. Are they ready to do that? No. But are you ready to do it? Why not? And for us, that was a risk and an investment, but it's been worth it. And what I will say is different from when we first looked at it was geothermal tended to be regional. It didn't really work where something over here happened over there. And that was a barrier that I would say is changing right now. Like we're starting to see a lot more adoption, and that's probably an oil and gas link because we're pushing into all these places all at once. Whereas the economics of geothermal kind of kept you local, you know, kept you working where you worked. And I think that's opening up. And I think, you know, what you're doing and what we're doing, it's because you're in these international companies who are used to doing that. And so the benefits are spreading, which means the market is more open. But no, it's not Santa Claus. They're not just dropping off cash to say do something for me. I think it's the same as any business.
But it's incremental improvement, and you know, maybe probably that word is an ugly word, but anyway, improvement made because it's the right thing to do.
That's right,
and that's what your company decided. And I think that's what the company I belong to has decided as well. And so, I mean, the only thing we can do to really stem the tide is the right thing. So, you know, do the right thing. So, I mean, it sounds very, and I am a very optimistic person, but, you know.
It helps to have a boss who's a geologist. I would say that probably. We did a lot of R&D and spent a lot of money on something that didn't work, but that was because my boss is a geologist.
But you're pushing forward nonetheless. And
it was good, and there was never a question.
Yeah.
Because it was because in the gut of a geologist is this has to be the answer.
It has to.
It has to be the answer. So that drive has caused us to have no real resistance, because there's just something in you that says that surely this is what we should be doing, other than maybe some micronuclear, but another story.
That's a great example.
Mhm.
I mean, you are a great example for us, and I hope for more of it.
So is there a piece there if you're trying to persuade your organization to venture into geothermal, start with the geologists?
So you're asking me, you're saying, is it hard to do that? Or how do we do that? Most of the company didn't want to do it. Honestly, they're business people. But as we've had people who were, it's more the culture of our company, people were pushing anyway, even though their bosses didn't want them to do it. But as it succeeded, of course, now we have a nice chorus of people saying we love geothermal, whereas like it's a thing they're doing too. It's a thing I'm doing, you know. So it's turned into a bit of a brag because it's growing so fast, and it has lots of upside. And so yeah, and it helped once again to have a CEO we might have a boss who's not happy, but our big boss.
Well, clearly someone recognized what oil and gas has to do with it. So thinking of our topic title. Oh, it's good. It's good to see.
I have another question here, which I think is quite relevant to the Aberdeen area. Are there offshore geothermal projects, and what do they comprise? Now, I'll answer that very quickly. Yes, there is some interest in the offshore space. We co-authored a paper that was presented at this morning's technical session with Total Energies. So I would encourage you to go onto One Petrol. You'll be able to get that abstract and the paper there. Now we have 5 or 6 minutes left, and I'm thinking it's maybe a good time to speak about the growth projection of geothermal. Henning, where could we be? Where could we be in a few years' time, and what do we need to do to get there?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting. I mean, looking into the crystal ball, there is. I mean, if you look at geothermal now, and if you, let's say you compare it to, for example, wind market. I mean, if you look at the size of wind turbines over the years, it's just an exponential curve, right? If you look at the output of or the installed capacity of a geothermal well, it's been over the last 20 years, it's been fairly stable at an average of around 4.5 megawatt electric. You of course have some extreme wells in both sides of the scale, but that also means that if you, let's say for example, you take all oil and gas drilling, which is 65,000-70,000 wells per year. Let's say we stop doing oil and gas today and we just do all geothermal with those rigs. And let's say you have a project require one production well and one injection well, then basically you are at the same level as you are for example, for wind, because in wind you can manufacture around 160 gigawatts of wind turbines every year. If you get 30,000 4.5 megawatt wells, you can basically get at the same kind of capacity as the wind market. But of course, geothermal has a much higher capacity factor. So, let's say 70% versus 30% in wind, for example. Yeah, at least. So then you're actually, if you account for that, you're actually at double of the wind side of things. But it also means that, let's say you drill 10,000 wells, right? You're still a very significant portion of the energy mix then, and it's a base load source, right? And 10,000 wells is like, sounds a lot, right? But we are actually drilling 800 wells a year now. We're drilling, as I said, 65,000 wells in oil and gas. 10,000 is not that scary.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I just did sort of a back of the envelope calculation of let's project the next 10 years in the United States and how much capacity has been estimated by the USGS and the Department of Energy, and with some pretty conservative assumptions. And I mean, we do a lot of due diligence for project finance, so we tend to the conservative side. I'm thinking, in the next 10 years, maybe something like 40,000 wells need to be drilled between conventional geothermal and EGS, just to get, the capacities of, say, 40 gigawatts of EGS and maybe another 5 gigawatts of conventional. Yeah, it's just really back of the envelope. But, this kind of gets us up into your territory, which I really like.
Exactly.
So, geothermal will be a thing. What do you say, David?
I don't know. That's the truth. We certainly, even this year, have grown more than we imagined in our numbers, and that's what we're seeing is trends that are moving like that. It was good enough for us to continue, and we're looking at way above numbers right now, and so that trend is encouraging. And I think the more people focus, the more people do, the more we access lower costs. The more stable things come, the more investment comes, the more regulation loosens up. I think it's got a really nice trajectory as it stands, and if it's better than that, that'd be great.
So the technical pieces are almost, I don't want to say they're the easiest, but
still some things, but
getting that permitting timeline shortened is critical. So I mean, this is something we're working on a lot in the Geothermal Rising Policy Committee. Just it's gotta be fixed.
Well, and I think the speed that the U.S. government suddenly moved, it's just getting voices to the ears of the right people.
Exactly so.
And that was a pretty swift move because they had tons of cash and didn't know what to do with it. Is that worth saying?
I don't know that they have tons of cash and didn't know what to do with it. I think it
don't
was,
know.
it
I
was,
felt like that. They sure had a bunch of money released into this space. And talking to them, they were trying to place it appropriately. How about that for a
yes.
political answer? But they were looking, and this is a great investment. They were under assessing, and so that's great news. It's made a big difference. I think it'll continue. I like tons of cash, but they didn't know what to do with it. So it's good.
Henning, where do you think we're going to see?
I'm sorry?
Where do you think we're going to see the main growth areas?
The
Just
main
quickly.
growth areas.
In a
Yeah,
minute.
no, yeah, great question. I mean, of course, you know, we're gonna see at least up until 2030, it's gonna be, you know, the core regions like Indonesia, massive potential,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Absolutely.
US as well is massive potential if we unlock, you know, EGS, for example.
Yep.
Kenya is gonna continue. You know, it's a ring of fire still up until 2030, right? And then the heating market in Europe, you know, just in kind of a base case, you know, business as usual case, you know, we'll probably go from 100 wells to 300 wells up until 2030. So big
Per year.
potential, yeah, per year. Yeah,
Mhm.
sorry, big potential in the European market and still around the ring of fire. And then it's, you know, up to David and everyone else, you know, working on new technologies to unlock the whole world, right?
The man of the hour.
Do what we can.
Well, can you believe it? That's an hour. We're almost out of time.
23 seconds.
23 seconds, better
You're
speak
gonna
quick.
do-
So I hope this is, you know, some of the people here today, this is maybe your first foray into geothermal. I hope this isn't the last discussion that you're going to have. I hope the discussion continues outside of this room. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of all the panelists when I hope this is just the start of these discussions. I would sincerely thank our panelists, Henning and David. Thank you for your time.
It's been fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good try.